This podcast is for general information purposes only and is not intended to create a physician-patient relationship. It is also not intended as a substitute for diagnosis, treatment, and/or advice by a qualified healthcare provider. Please promptly schedule an appointment with a qualified healthcare provider if you have a healthcare condition that has not been diagnosed or that is not under the regular care of a healthcare provider, or you're considering changes to your diet or exercise routines. Please refrain from self-diagnosis and/or self-treatment. And if you have a medical condition situation that may be urgent, then you should immediately report to the nearest emergency room.
And flat tires called jobs. But if you have a spear called determination and an engine called perseverance, with insurance called faith and the drive to make it, you'll reach a place called success.
This is Dr.J, and welcome to Reach a Place Called Success. Once again, we are here for part 2 with Claire Este McDonald. I'm so excited for part 2. I'm so excited for part 3. I'm so excited for part 4, and I hope you guys are too. Claire has been with us now for the previous podcast to discuss her experiences in her life when she had multiple back injuries in addition to her diagnosis of breast cancer. We are here with Claire. She is a registered nurse. She is a Master Baptiste yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and an Ayurvedic health counselor. So once again, welcome, Claire.
It's nice to be here, Jay. Thank you.
So we are back at it again. One of the things that, we kind of busted through was how, you learn to persevere, and the self-awareness that you have in your life started at a very young age. You were talking about your grandmother and the experiences that you had with her, and how this has kind of molded your life into some of the experiences that you have and being able to deal with those things. What I would like to do at this point now is just talk a little bit more in depth about that self-awareness, and bring in also your experiences with yoga, and being at that Master Baptiste level. And then as a yoga therapist, what does that actually even mean? Kind of explain some things regarding that.
Okay, yeah, I always felt like I was a weird kid. The self-awareness piece was more or less, I think, stemmed from the fact that from a very early age, even I remember I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I used to draw pictures, and the pictures of trees and animals didn't look like trees and animals. It was like essentially I was drawing the aura or the energy around these structures and these experiences that I had in life. And that my parents at an early age were kind of like, wow, this is a little different. And I was a little different in that way. I was very sensitive, and I was very much in tune with things that maybe other kids weren't. And it made me feel quite isolated, I must admit, because I knew that I was different. I knew that I wasn't going to be putting things together in a way that other people did. And I just went through my life in that way, feeling a bit like an outsider and separate. And in some ways, that is probably one of the most powerful things that I still have in me, is that there's not a sense of trying to fit in with the grain of life. For me, it's always been, I have to feel what's happening, and I have to notice if that resonates for me, if that's something that I can truly put my life force into. Like whatever I do in my life, I feel like if I can't commit to it from my heart, I can't do it. And that feeling was always there as a child, and it was very much a guidance system. And but you take a long and winding road when you're sensitive and when you feel things, because it isn't always going to be what the pictures look like. You sort of have to adjust all the time and stay true to yourself. And, and that brought me into nursing. I'll admit, when I was applying to nursing school, I didn't think I was smart enough. I really didn't. I was, a slow learner. It was challenging for me. and everything in nursing was, intense. It's an amazing thing to become a nurse or a medical person. I knew I had the heart for it, but I didn't know if I would have the intellect to take a test that would be able to get me across that threshold. And lo and behold, that wasn't the case, because I think love and passion open you up to being able to do things that you never dreamed were possible. Like when you have a sense of something that's really, really true in your spirit, you can do anything. You just have to say yes to it. And so I found that, yes, very early on, but it didn't make me immune to ups and downs. I just knew that I had an ability to check back in with myself. And that was something that was always there. And it's gotten me really far. What really brought me, I was thinking about this from our last conversation, what really brought me to yoga, even though I had been around it, and I had been around Ayurveda, I had been around yoga, and it was very much a part of my lifestyle, it didn't really mean anything until stuff started happening. I didn't really know the value of it when everything was going fine. It just felt like everything was going fine, and you can become pretty oblivious because it feels like everything is clicking and everything is going in the right direction. And then you hit a place where either you plateau or you hit a brick wall where you can no longer do things the way that you were doing them. And it wasn't that they were wrong or broken, but I knew that at that moment when I had my back injuries, that life was asking more of me than what I thought I could give or what I expected of myself. And if oftentimes in life, I feel like things happen that we would never have chosen, but looking back, you realize that was the best thing that ever happened. And my back injuries truly were because I learned, I studied anatomy and kinesiology, and I also have a big background in that. I was passionate about physiology, but it was from my back injuries where I wasn't able to walk. After the second and the third surgery, I had paralysis in my right leg. I had such nerve paralysis that I walked with a cane. And it was just, I walked into the Baptiste studio in 2000, July of 2000. And I walked with my cane, and I was very self-conscious. I was very, very afraid. In essence, I didn't want people to see me this way, but I had nothing to lose, because it was either that, like step into that unknown possibility of just like walking into a public yoga class, or I was going to have a spinal fusion. And my doctor had given me 2 weeks. He said, you got to like really think about this. And when I came to my first Baptiste class, a dear friend had brought me, and I remember putting my cane under my yoga mat. And I didn't actually like the class because it was so bloody hot. It was so overwhelming. It made me nauseous. I was like, I feel like I've just died and gone to hell. But when
I still feel that way, and I've been doing it for 6 years. So
I know, right? I was just like, what is going on here? And there was like 90 people, and it was like crazy. And then we stood up to Om, and it was like the whole world cracked open. I remember just standing there, and my whole entire body, my legs, my spine, everything, it was like having an earthquake or a bolt of lightning just shooting through my body. And I knew at that moment, I'm like, you're going to be okay. Like, I was crumbling. My marriage was falling apart. I had 2 children. I was just in this place where I'm like, I can't believe this is my life. And how did I get here? But it was in that moment that I was like, everything just opened, and the power of like 90 people oming, and like 3 times, it was just this massive energy shift that happened to me. And it was shortly after that, I kept coming to class, and it was shortly after that that Baron just came over to me, and he was like, I think it's incredibly courageous. And I don't know your story, but I can see your story. And like, maybe you want to be a yoga teacher, maybe you want to teach. And it was like, I had already been teaching, but I realized, no, this was now another game. This was a whole other level of upping my game and to who and what I wanted to do and be in the world.
Explain to me what you mean by that. A difference in the the type of yoga, or something else that's like calling you? What do you?
Yeah, it was the type of yoga, but also what I loved so much about the Baptiste style was that it was about transformation. And my husband and I have a big background in transformation, like understanding like how you talk and what you're saying, what's your message, who you're being in this world. And what just totally lit me up was that it was so raw. Like the practice was crazy and intense. And, you know, like, I don't think yoga needs to always be crazy and intense, but like at that moment, like I needed like layers of me to be peeled back. And like, that was just so like, stand in your tears, stand in your fear, stand in whatever is there, and like really feel your own power. And that message to me was what I had been looking for. And I knew that inside of myself, it resonated. It was that feeling that I had as a kid that made me feel like an outsider, that I knew I could stay true to myself. That feeling came back to me in that moment, in that class, where it was like, wait a minute, you're not broken. This is happening to you, and it's unfortunate and it's hard, and there's a big hole you're going to climb out of, but you can climb out of the hole. And that's what I felt from this practice. And it's what it for 20 years I've been passionate about Baptiste yoga. Now, you know, now I've woven in all of the other things that I do in the way that I teach and what I do. But it was always about the Baptiste practice. What I loved about it was always about your own self-expression. Like, who are you? Why are you here? What's your message? What's your voice? And my husband and I both had extraordinary mentorship and guidance from Baron as a person, because for him, it was, he didn't care how much knowledge I had. What it was is like, you're going in front of a room with 90, 100, 200 people. You need to get out of the way, get out of the way of yourself, and like, let the message of life come through you. And that is what I live. Like, that was the practice.
That's the right there. What you just said is the difference between a good yoga teacher and a great yoga teacher. I'll be honest with you. And the thing that I have experienced, just to add on to that, when you sat there or stood there for the first time and did Om 3 times in a row, and you have all of this self-awareness, it's all about you. The bottom line, though, is that there's this self of community, that you aren't alone. Like, you have that community, those 90 people in that 90-degree temperature or however hot it is, and you almost feel empowered because of that. So although everything is really truly about your own journey, as Baron even says, you have that sense of community, which is an amazing thing.
Yeah, community is everything. You know, I this past week, you know, Jay, is about my dog Ferdinand becoming so gravely ill. Like, I was teaching a class on Saturday morning when my husband came in. I was teaching right here where I'm sitting, and I'm halfway through the class, and I knew something was going on in my house. And I'm teaching this class, and I could feel the energy downstairs in my house. And my husband comes up and he looks at me, and I took one moment to just mute so he could say, he said, Ferdinand is not well at all. And my husband never does this. We know you do not interrupt somebody when they're teaching. We're sort of got this like little black box of our room.
Yeah.
And I unmuted, and I knew in my heart, I'm like, all I did was pray. I'm like, okay, I have to carry on in this moment. I have to trust my husband. He's going to go take care of my dog. And I have to stand right where I am and have faith. Like, in that moment, again, this Shaktipat moment of like knowing you have to be where you are right now. You're doing something. And I knew he was being taken care of, and I knew about the amount of time that it would take to get everybody gathered together. I had to trust community. I had to trust my husband. I had to trust my family to do that. And every step of the way, though, Jay, what was mind blowing is as I'm sitting in the car, I texted, or I Facebooked and I Instagrammed. I just said, please, community, please send your love and prayers. And this is quite overwhelming. Immediately, people started saying, like, sending love and sending light, sending energy to my Ferdinand. And I was completely taken back by that. But it doesn't surprise me though, because when I was going through breast cancer, people were sending me notes every day. People were texting me and messaging me and say, you don't need to respond. I just want you to know that I love you. I want you to know that I'm here. And that is that power, the power of love is the single most important energy in the universe that can move a mountain, that can, I know what it did for me and I know what it did for my Ferdinand. And, but to be able to talk about that and to be able to say, like, acknowledge that is not so easy. We can say that, right? We can say that we acknowledge it, but I know for myself, when people acknowledge me, I'm always a bit like, no, of course, I wanted to do that. It's a two-way street, like healing and love. It's not just giving it, it's the ability to receive it. It's the ability to let this in. And I feel that, yoga is part of what yoga does is to help us to understand that we're not alone, like what it is to be a human being, what it is to be walking a journey and know that you are going to fumble. It is written in stone, essentially, that you're going to trip at some point, you're going to fumble. And how we get back up is what matters, in my opinion. Like, how do we get back up? How do we carry on? And being able to let others see us in that vulnerability and in that space of not having our A game and just being a real person, being real and raw,
Well, that's what that's what I love about you. I mean, that's that shows through. And I saw that on Instagram also, and it was one of those things that it's like I knew how much all of your animals mean to you, and just so that everybody's aware, Ferdinand is home now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He had a hemorrhagic stroke, and what your husband, I'm assuming, witnessed was a seizure.
Well, he witnessed him collapsing, and then he had a seizure when we got to we were right in front of the vet hospital. And yeah.
Well, I'm glad that he's home, at least with his mama. And because certainly nobody's going to be loving him more than you.
No, that's true. And he's actually doing quite well. It's amazing. He is not done. He is certainly sort of, he's got another round, and I don't know how long it will last, but I'm going to take it. And he's a fighter, and he reminds me every day of just, take it as it comes. If you get too far ahead of ourselves, that's when I get anxious, when I think I have to know, when I have to sort of plan. I'm not a good planner. I'm blessed in that way. I'm a terrible planner. I before our conversation today, a friend said, well, what do you do in your prep? I said, I'm vacuuming. I'm making my bed, because if I sit down and try to, plan this out, it's not going to go well. It's all
not natural, and it's not what we're trying to go for here. That's not what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, I want you to be real. So we talked a little bit also last time about, during breast cancer treatments, and we talked about some of the things that you experienced also when you were really, actually, your worst was when you had your hysterectomy, and you had the unfortunate 1%, as you have said all along, from a complication standpoint, you ended up having internal bleeding from that. That was one of those things that really touched me, because, it was one of those things where you didn't know, your doctors didn't know where this was going to go. That's, what a curveball. Your life is full of curveballs. You realize that, right?
Yeah. I know. And It certainly was a curveball. It was meant to be sort of an in and out. I remember when I was lying in the pre-op area, the nurse she gave me my discharge paper. She said, we'll go over these when you're done, but I want you to read them while you're cognitive. And I had a feeling when I was sitting there and waiting that I was like, I don't think I'm going to be going home, but I'll read this. And when I came out of surgery, I knew something was up. But you're in another world from anesthesia and all those things. Honestly, it was just one of those moments where I was in a lot of pain, and the nurses, I knew something was going on because everybody kept putting me upside down. Basically, my blood pressure was really low. And, but before anybody knew quite what was happening, I knew I was flipping out. I knew I was going in a bad direction, or in a direction that having so much pain and knowing that you don't have control. Like, there was one of those moments where I clearly knew that I was in the hands of all of my caretakers, and that the level, I could see the look in their eyes, the fear, and they were trying to stay calm for me. And it was just a moment where I knew things were going to be different. And there was a moment, and I had shared with you, Jay, earlier, that I don't share this that often. It's just that there was a moment where there was so much pain, and I felt like I was just sinking down in the water. It was like I was in water, and all of a sudden I just started to submerge lower and lower and deeper and deeper. And I finally got to the bottom of the ocean, and I remember this feeling of just sitting there, and the wave, there was sort of this current that was rocking me back and forth. I could feel it in me energetically, like I was just rocking and rocking. And there was a moment where all of the pain went away, and I just felt like I was going to shift right and just be sucked out. Like I was just going to go. And it was so peaceful. I remember having been it was almost like a plane crash moment, and then like a plane just sinking to the bottom of the ocean, and then the drama's over and it's all done. And I had that feeling of going from that trauma and drama to like absolutely peace and quiet and stillness. And that moment of knowing like, oh my God, something's happening. And before I could say, there were no words, but then my son's face came to me, and I knew I wasn't leaving. And then the pain came back, and it was like I came right back up to the plane crash and the room being filled with people. And I'll never forget the feeling though. I remember just knowing that, wow, it's that quick, or it's that in a moment things change. But I wasn't done. It wasn't over. And I had more to do here. And it was definitely around my children. As a mother, it's something I wanted to be. I knew even when I was a little girl that I was going to be a mother. I didn't know if I was going to get married or not. I didn't even think about the relationship I was going to have. The dream was always the children, and to have like a house filled with kids. And so my children are like everything. And I knew that, that was my fear with breast cancer, was not me, not what I was going through, but like what was happening to my family and what would happen to my children, and how would I do what I needed to do for them to have them set in the world. And it was, again, another humbling moment to think like, how could you possibly set them up for their lives? You can't. You can set them up for now, and you can give them everything that you have inside of you, but they're going to be who they are in the world. And this, whatever happens to me, is going to be an experience that they carry through their lives that will shape them and create who they're going to be. And, it's just a weird thing to process in your head. But again, it comes back to me, this feeling of like, it's not going to fit the pictures. It's not going to be the idea that I had in my head. This is real, and this is going to change that. And how well I get on board with this change and what's really happening, to me, is the health. To me, is like, that's what brings things back to a healthy place. It's not perfect. It's, if anything, it's totally imperfect, but in that is the beauty and the realness of like how life really wants to express itself through me and through my life.
It's amazing. Well, I just have to say, from me and from anyone who's listening to this, thank you. Thank you so much for going to that level of talking to us about your experience, because people they do get down and out for health reasons, or even just on a day-to-day basis, and having someone be able to articulate the way that you do the experiences that you've had and what you have gone through is really, it's amazing. It's amazing thing that you're doing to have everybody understand that. And what you and I have talked about is really, what is the next step also? And this journey that you've gone through and your experiences that you've had, everything that you did before set you up for the ability to be able to have success to a certain degree, with all the things that you've gone through. But as you said, it's not until you actually have those things happen to you that you have to use those tools that you've learned over your entire life. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to have people understand that, yes, there's modern medicine that helps you with diagnoses and with treatments, but there's other things that are internal that you don't even know you have a lot of the time until you need to use them, right? And the more you can learn about yourself before anything like that happens in your life, it's great. But a lot of people don't seek these things out until there are real issues, right? So the other idea is that people will now be looking at this going, hey, listen, now I never practiced anything in my life that she's talking about, but now I do have a diagnosis of breast cancer, and I am going to see the doctor. What else can I do? And that's where I think that the next level of discussion is where do you even start? Where do, where do I start in this process of self-awareness?
I think that's a really good question, because it will be different for everybody. But I think one of the simplest ways, Jay, is that moving your body. And we exercise, right? There's exercising, and that's an important thing. And then there's that transformation where exercise becomes more of an understanding of like how your energy works and how exercise or moving your body makes you feel. Like noticing that space between you start feeling one way when you start your practice, and then noticing how you feel when you're done. And in between there lies this very, I don't want to just call it spiritual, because I think a lot of times it can be like, oh, that's that thing, that weird thing that happens. But it is a spiritual practice where you believe that your life and your experience of yourself in life is that valuable. That you begin to take care of not just your physical body like it's hardware, but you begin to take care of your whole being as like, this is the container we have. And, maybe it's given 100 years, right? And then that 100 years starts to depreciate when we have all this stress and all these things happen to us. We start counting that clock back. Now, what I like to think of is yoga and Ayurveda and all these things are mindfulness practices, because what they do is they help you to begin to know, like, okay, today, how should I move my body? Some days I need to go into a hot, sweaty room and move my body vigorously, but I can't do that anymore. Like, I can't move like that anymore. I've done that, and my energy is already like that. I have a lot of fire. I'm a very, I have a lot of energy, and I got to be mindful of not burning out my energy by doing overkill or doing too much. When I first started, I needed a lot to get me going. I needed a lot of support. And now it's finding that the gray area. So I can still walk into a hot yoga class, but I don't need to like move my energy the way that I did 20 years ago. I can be very, very yin in a very, very yang environment. I can be very, very easy going in a very assertive or a very physically demanding place. And it's knowing that that's the very important thing. And that's why I would say to people is like having daily practices helps you to begin to understand how your energy flows, like how what you need today will be different than what you need tomorrow. And you start to have an attunement with that. And there's no shortcut. There's no way to think I can just do the same thing all the time and it won't matter, because that's the piece that really, really does matter, is knowing how much and when, and knowing when to stop and back off. And we live in a society where, especially, you know, I live in Boston, you're in New York, and these are very successful places. There's a lot of success and there's a lot of drive and there's a lot of need to always put ourselves out there. And what I learned is that, okay, I have all that going for me, but I now need to, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, you know, you see the big head and there's that big head and there's all that expression, but then there's the little man behind the curtain. And we have to address the little man behind the curtain, in my opinion, because that's the place inside of us that goes, okay, all of this that I'm putting out here, I have to get back to the original furnace or the original system and know, like, how is that doing? Mm-hmm. Because if I'm constantly where the tire hits the road, if I keep living where the tire hits the road, I'm going to burn out. We have to pull way back to the center and understand what's happening in that place. And so these consistent practices, they help us to get a sense, okay, we're moving the wheel. And initially we can keep feeling like we're hitting the ground with the wheel. But then over time, what happens is you can begin to feel where you're pulling back into a place of noticing, like, how does that feel? How is that working? Because there's a cumulative effect. And so without consistency, we don't ever really have access to the cumulative effect. And so that is the biggest piece for me when I work with clients. I'm always saying, okay, let's just do 20 minutes. Let's just get up. And at the same time, every day, try to start setting up a routine so that, you know, this part of the day, this is your part of the day. Before all of this other stuff gets going, you're going to spend some time over here to really check in with yourself and do practices that help your body to essentially, like, to clear your channels, to clear your energy. So it's like hitting Control Alt Delete, and that your new day now, you start off on a very clean, even tone, so that whatever comes at you, you can deal with it as it's happening. Like I was saying, you know, before we had our call, and you say, are you ready for this? I'm like, I'm always ready for this. I'm always going to be ready for this, because I know that putting something off until tomorrow, there's going to be a whole other thing I'm going to have today that I'll bring into tomorrow with me. So I've just gotten to this point in my life where I'm like, just bring it. Sure. Let me just notice, how much energy do I need to do what's in front of me? Right aim, right effort, versus always wondering how to do things in an exacerbated manner. Like, I don't need to. I just need to know, like, how much do I need right now? And just stay open, but keep showing up. Just consistently show up. And that's part of, like, the yoga therapy is, you would ask me, like, what's yoga therapy? And there's a whole school, there's a whole training in yoga therapy. And I have that, but I also, for me, yoga therapy is, because I do also have a psychology background and I work in yoga with the mind. It's yoga therapy is really understanding, like, how does your mind work? And then noticing if you have, there's the principles of sattva, rajas, and tamas, which are states of consciousness of the mind. And sattva is pure, and everything about sattva, we love sattva because it means it's innocent. It's how the mind naturally is. It's naturally calm. It's naturally innocent. It's naturally open. It says yes to everything. And rajas and tamas are what we call the doshas of the mind. They're the states that we are under the influence of, and that's what accumulates. Now, you need sattva, rajas, and tamas because you can't have one without the other. They all go together. But rajas is the kinetic energy. It's like the energy that gets you doing things in the world. It gets you out of bed in the morning. It gets you out into the world. Anytime you want to do a job, you got to call in rajas. And tamas is inertia. And we need inertia and tamas in order to go to sleep at night. But what happens is when we have too much inertia, we end up getting depressed and we get heavy and we get overwhelmed, anxiety and fear. And those are naturally occurring because of that energy. Now we need all of these energies to be in balance. And what having daily practices does is helps us to understand how much of these we have and how what our mind gets stuck on. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. One of the most amazing things from one of the first things that you and I had done, the connection that we had made was a post that I had done on my Instagram where I simply just took a picture of a trail that I was going to be running for the day. And it's spring season and, you know, I'm obviously everybody's caught up in isolation, but, you know, listening to my body's needs, I hadn't run since last year, and I felt like I just needed to go out and do that, not only physically, but I just needed to get out in nature. I needed to clear my head and get out of, you know, the exercise regimen that I needed to for that day. I find that, you know, the yoga practice in the wintertime, I was doing it on a day-to-day basis, but I did find that whatever I would do on a day-to-day basis in yoga would be different, what I would get out of it. You know, there was always a physical component, but there was also this other, I can't put words into it just because I'm just experiencing it. You're the one that has kind of like, has been living this for such a long time. So, but when I talk to you, it's like one of those things where it's putting to words the things that have been happening inside my head for quite a bit of time. It's an amazing thing to be able to hear you talk in this way.
Well, I'm glad, because I know it too, Jay. I know for a long time that I didn't have words to describe what I was feeling. And that's the point, is that's what's so wonderful about staying in it, is that over time you begin to go, okay, I remember 6 years ago, I was feeling one way. What brought you onto your mat? And now 6 years later, you sort of have this whole long road you can look back on and go, wow, I could see how that carried me through the ups and downs of my life. And now you have this discernment and knowing, you know, I need to go for a run today. I need to shift gears. Because we have a practice, right? And I always have an asana practice. I always get on my yoga mat every single day, but I don't practice yoga as exercise. It's not my exercise. Like I just have to do it. It's how I move my mind and how I move my emotions and how I get all my body and my mind and my spirit all in one place. And then there's that part of me though, that knows, like today, I'm going for a run. I'm like my legs and my lungs are calling me outside, because I know that I need more of that kinetic energy. I need to feel my heart beating a certain way and being in the fresh air. And that's exactly what I'm talking about this. You begin to know. And it's springtime, and we have a lot of heavy emotions right now with this coronavirus and all the fear that people feel. And that's a lot of tamas, that inertia, the heavy emotions and the heavy rain and the heaviness of spring. Before we finally get warm enough, we have a lot of heaviness. And so there's this need to stimulate that rajas. There's a need to stimulate the activity so that we can balance out the heaviness. Because we can't just go to stillness of sattva. We can't just get to a place where it's all like, yes, I'm very zen and it's amazing. We have to begin to feel what's really there. And so these daily practices of doing asana, and we'll talk about the Ayurvedic regime as well. We know that in Ayurveda and yoga, we know about sattva, rajas, and tamas. We know, like, okay, we're going to be playing with those different energies so that you feel balanced, so that you know for you what's balanced and centered for you. What's healthy for you isn't what's healthy for me. And so it's a very personal journey. And it's not that hard. And initially, at first, people think, no, this is really hard and I'm not going to know. I'm like, well, don't look for results. Don't have these expectations of being able to all of a sudden go from A to Z. You got to go A to B. And then at B, you go to C. And it isn't necessarily a linear thing. It doesn't work that way. It's more of a circumferential awareness of yourself and knowing like, okay, if I stop expecting myself to do this perfectly, you open yourself up to this whole other realm of possibility of just being in the present moment. And then the energy tells you what to do. And so it's just a matter of softening and yielding, and giving ourselves time. Patience is the most important thing. And, that's a word that I've had to learn and live. As soon as I think that I have patience, life sends me another big bone and says, how patient are you now? Right? How humble are you now? I've learned humility, but like life says, no, you can never learn humility. You have an experience of it. You have an experience of patience. You have an experience of something, but like, don't think that now you've got it. And I think that's another big piece of, as far as being healthy is that life is alive. Mm-hmm. And we're alive, and you can't hold on to it. And
you got to go with it. It's like you're riding the waves in the ocean. Just don't fight it, ride with it, enjoy it, get as much out of it as you can, know what your own limitations are, and your own expectations are kind of out the door. Like you have to live it in order to know what you're capable of. And that's what's an amazing thing. If you were able to look at you and what you've accomplished, because you've had to, with your perseverance, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. But now it's one of those things that what we're trying to do is we're trying to look ahead. You're getting that energy enough now that you aren't using that energy just to survive anymore. Now you want to be able to use that energy for a positive. And that's what I also want to do too. And that's why I think that we have such synergy. Our next episode, we're going to be diving into more hardcore, what we've been dancing around here for a little bit of time, which is the Ayurvedic method of medicine. And maybe it's probably best for us to, as we try and wrap up this podcast, you give Reader's Digest or CliffsNotes version of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow and what we've kind of laid the groundwork for today to try and as a stepping stone to what we're going to be discussing tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Or next podcast, I guess I could say tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that what'll be helpful is I'll break down like what is Ayurveda, right? Ayurveda is I'll share some of these slokas that we have, because I think when you go back to the original text, they are really powerful in understanding that everything in Ayurveda comes down to digestive power, essentially. Because if you're Agni, we call it Agni. Agni is fire. And fire, we know that as soon as man discovered fire, we started living longer because we started cooking our food. We started having illumination, and like fire is a symbol of charisma and light and energy. And essentially, like when we don't have good Agni, we have health problems. We don't have any charisma. We don't have any energy. And I know going through my own journey is that Western medicine is fantastic for getting me where I was. But what happened was the inside job now is my pilot light was going out. Like the strength, my body was inundating with processing all of the chemo and the radiation and food and life. We have to digest everything that comes into our system. And if we don't have a good furnace, we don't digest well. It's like putting a piece of meat on the stove and you only have a really, really kind of lame flame. You know that it would take hours to cook that piece of meat. Sure. And I tell people that as a metaphor is like if you don't have a good digestive fire in your gut, everything that you put into your body, it doesn't matter how organic or healthy it is, if your body can't digest it, essentially that just putrefies in your system. And then that's where our health problems come from, is the body just cannot get at the nutrients. And so that's the fundamental piece. And then knowing that though, and all of these practices that I do on a daily basis are there to make sure that that digestive fire is processing at its optimum. Because this is how I got my energy back. And this is essentially why I was able to live through what happened to me. I talked to a lot of doctors on both sides that were like, we don't know how you survived, but my Ayurvedic doctors know. They knew that, like, okay, I had this physical Agni, but also the charisma of my soul, the charisma of my being that was open to, I'm going to survive. That has an Agni too. That fire and that desire to be alive is the most important Agni. And how do we understand that? And Ayurveda takes into consideration mind, body, senses, and spirit, as well as contentment in life. That's what we consider healthy. Is like when all that is functioning, then we know that this is a healthy person. And so that's the piece, though, that we're not really taught in the West about understanding, we can have this, food pyramid and this diet about what we think the body physically needs. But then there's a whole other understanding of like, well, we can say you need these things, but can you digest them? And how do we meet the individual needs of the person in a bigger way? And so Ayurveda addresses all of that, which is why I'm so passionate about it, because I know that whenever I'm looking for an answer as to like, what do I need to do for myself, I can't find it in the food pyramid or in fact-based medicine. I look into these other avenues that have been around for thousands of years, where we know like they understand the energy of life, they understand the energy of seasons and the change of season and the environment and Mother Nature, because no matter what we think, we are a reflection of Mother Nature. And I think we know that now by looking at the coronavirus and what's happening and how we're dealing with healthcare at this point, is that why does one person get exposed to the coronavirus and nothing happens, and someone else gets it and they're a little sick, and someone gets it and their life is in a very threatened place? Is a very individual thing. And what is that piece that we can look at though and understand like why? And we can get closer to the why in Ayurveda.
That's great. I think that this is what a lot of doctors like myself need to know more about, because again, we are taught based on evidence-based medicine that you have a diagnosis, you give a treatment, and this is the outcome. But once you get into practice, you realize, sure, you might get that diagnosis right, but there's a whole person behind that diagnosis. And what you inevitably are going to be doing from a treatment standpoint is not always consistent on the outcome. This isn't like a manufacturing plant. And having that person that you're actually diagnosing and treating playing a role in this discovery and this treatment is so critical. And that's where I think that we want to try and move the needle, right? We want to be able to have physicians understand this so that they can also give guidance and when patients have questions, be able to answer them and help them. Now, not every doctor needs to be an Ayurvedic, gosh, I need help with this, Ayurvedic specialist, but that's why we have this area of like that you are becoming a doctor of, to be able to help guide individuals too. So I'm excited about our next podcast, learning more.
I am too, because it's very exciting. I feel like we're at this place we've been wanting to get to for a long time, Jay. I think I think that life has helped us get to where we are, and that there can be truly an integrative approach, that everybody is necessary, but we just can open up the communication and support this health and being something that's accessible for everybody, and know how to talk to each other, which is the important thing, is that we can start talking about principles that other people don't understand, but we are really talking about the same thing, but we have different approaches as to how we can manage. And that's exciting. I've been waiting for this all of my life.
Yeah,
to have this conversation.
That's not to put the cart before the horse here, but as you and I just kind of threw out there that we would do a series of 4 podcasts, that's kind of like the fun that I'm looking forward to on the 4th podcast is really how do we let's troubleshoot, on a podcast about what we could potentially be offering the rest of the world. How can we do this? So we're laying it all out there for you guys. I'm going to kind of put a close to the session here. Hopefully that's okay with you, Claire.
That's great. I think we've covered enough for now.
Yeah, it was great. I feel like, again, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully everybody enjoyed today's podcast, and we'll be working hard on the next one. Thanks for coming on, Claire, and everybody else. Thank you for being part of Reach a Place Called Success. I'm Dr. J, and we'll see you next time.
And red lights called enemies, caution signs called family, and flat tires called jobs. But if you have a spear called determination, and an engine called perseverance, with insurance called faith, and the drive to make it, you'll reach a place called success.